Hello, this is a workshop on sleep supporting strategies, and it's for the therapist who works late. I presented this for a local networking event, and I thought I'd make a recorded version for anyone who wasn't able to make it. And so let's dive in. Just want to be clear that this is a mini workshop. It was scheduled to be 20 minutes. And so we do not have enough time to talk about assessment, insomnia, and other sleep disorder treatments, or problems related to insufficient sleep opportunity. So essentially, not having enough time scheduled for sleep. This can happen with young parents who are up late because they're trying to catch up on things or working while the kids are sleeping and then up early or up throughout the night. It's not an issue with your own brain or body keeping you up. It's sort of an environmental thing. Another example is shift work. So if you're up all night for your work, that's not something that we'll be addressing here. Now, if you have to work late, that is something we're addressing here. So if you work the late shift, but you're not working the whole night, we'll be able to talk about some strategies for you. There is another workshop you can access at bodymindalliancecc.com/prevent, spelled Prevent, if you want to learn about assessment and prevention strategies. So there is that workshop option. And if you go to my main website, which is probably where you already are viewing this, then you can find that. Just click the URL and add /prevent, Prevent. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's dive in. So my first question, especially for therapists, is do you want to work late? If you work in an emergency room department or, the night shift of a security, in a security role, you have to work late. But as therapists, we get to decide, many of us, not all of us, many of us get to decide if you want to work late or not. And so, for many people, working late can be an incredible opportunity. If you're a night owl, working late you can just thrive in a later schedule. But if you're a morning person and you feel like you quote unquote should work late, this is sort of a question I'm putting out there. We can make your body work for work, but it's easier and more sustainable to make your work for your body. So I hope that makes sense. And for all of this, feel free to email me if you have any questions. And my email is schedule@bodymindalliancecc.com. And if you're already on my website, which you probably are, you can find my contact information that way. We can kind of talk through. I love to offer free peer therapist to therapist consultations, kind of like peer supervision. So today we're going to be talking about late work, not overwork. So when we're talking about having a work schedule that runs late, I'm wondering, and kind of a question in my mind is this a matter of overwork? Because that's a risk factor for something called revenge bedtime procrastination, which you may have heard of, especially if you're neurodivergent or affirming of neurodiverse identities. And essentially, what this is there's not enough time for fun. And so, or there's overwhelm or other things going on, task switching issues. But essentially, there's enough time to go to sleep, but you just can't stop what you're doing and you procrastinate on going to bed. I don't love the wording of procrastination. I think that's been historically used in a shaming way, but that's the word that it is. Even in the research, they've been calling it that. So we have a little comic here. I hope you can see where the character here is thinking, I can't fit video games into my schedule. And then they're kind of looking around and thinking, well, or can I? Can I fit video games into my schedule? And they're removing the sleep block off of the schedule and have the video games in hand to replace it. So essentially, playing video games, and next thing you know, it's the middle of the night or early morning. So in this presentation, I'm just briefly touching on overwork as something to keep an eye out for, but it's not something that we're going to address in this presentation. And on that note, I think it can be helpful to do a schedule check. So I want to invite you to open up your schedule and do a little self-assessment. I'm going to read through the questions, and feel free to pause the video so that you can go through it and take all the time you need. So it's important to count admin work, training, email, all the things we do as therapists that often don't are ignored or missed when it comes to counting our work. A lot of times we think about the clinical hours, but there's a lot of things we have to do that are not direct face-to-face clinical work. So counting all of that, including clinical work, how many hours do you work on average? And you can pause the video. I'm going to go to the next question, but if you need more time, you can pause the video in between. So, and what's the time difference between when you start working and when you stop working? So even if you're not working continuously during that time, and you're getting up, first thing when you wake up, you're checking an email and maybe responding to things, and then you're working all the way until late at night. Is there a large distance? And how much variability is there in the time of day that the schedule is? So is it one day really early in the morning, next day you're super late at night, and like it's yo-yoing like that? Or is it really consistent? 10 to 6 every day? Probably not if you work late. But is it, 5 to 11 every day? Kind of looking at how much variability. And we'll talk in a minute about why that matters if there's a lot of variability. Okay, and then thinking about the time between when you start and when you stop working. Or excuse me, what's the time between when you stop working and your bedtime? So is that 5 minutes? You wrap up a session, brush your teeth, jump into bed? Or are you checking your emails in bed or working in bed and then immediately trying to fall asleep? Or are you giving yourself a couple hours to wind down, enjoy some relaxation time, kind of winding down and shifting, and then your bedtime? So looking at the difference between when you stop working and your bedtime. Okay, so assuming that either you really enjoy a night owl schedule, maybe you've just been born for this and you're excited about the idea of staying up late, or maybe this is a time in your life where you need a later schedule. Using the example of young kids again, this may be the only time where you have some time to yourself, or maybe if you're doing some caregiving tasks, you need a later schedule. It's not a matter of overwork. Here are some strategies. So I'm going to start with sleep hygiene, and there's a caveat. So sleep hygiene is essentially having a cool, dark, comfortable room, kind of the things you would think about when you're thinking about what can help with sleep. The caveat is that if there is a deeper issue, if it is insomnia, or if there's another sleep disorder, sleep hygiene, trying that creates a cycle of hopelessness, because it's not enough to treat sleep disorder or insomnia or circadian rhythm disorder, things like that. So many times people try sleep hygiene and they keep doubling down, trying harder. It's reinforced by a lot of people in their life to just do more sleep hygiene, and they get stuck in this cycle of hopelessness because they don't know there are effective treatments. So we're going to start with sleep hygiene, but if this doesn't help, then continue on. This is not the end of the road. So for sleep hygiene, we want to keep the workspace separate from the sleep space. So if you're seeing clients while you're in bed, doing notes while in bed, I'm going to go to the next slide to kind of show what I mean. You're going to associate that bed with thinking and working and maybe being entertained and maybe eating and daytime planning and also sleep. All these brain states are very different from sleep. So it becomes difficult for our brain to know what gear we're supposed to be switching into. If you remember Pavlov's dogs, you'll remember that they were conditioned to associate the bell with food, and so they would salivate in response to the bell. And so when we work and plan and eat and do very awake type things in bed, we have a conditioned arousal. So we're conditioned to be sort of like a low grade stress, or maybe high, maybe an intense stress, depending on what you've conditioned. And so even if there's nothing bad happening, we're sort of associating that stress state with the bed. And so that can get in the way of quality sleep. So keeping the workspace separate from the sleep space. We also want to avoid caffeine close to the bedtime. So if you're working late and presumably staying up later, you can drink caffeine later than the typical recommended time, which is usually like noon or any later than the morning. But we want to keep in mind that the half-life ranges. Usually it's 4 to 5 hours, but can be as long as 9 hours. So keep in mind when you're drinking the caffeine, thinking about, okay, when's my bedtime? And if you're someone who's sensitive to caffeine, maybe working your way 9 hours back. Or maybe if you're not as sensitive to it, working your way back 4 or 5 hours. And if you have ADHD, or if you tend to be really thriving as a night owl, you may not be as impacted by the caffeine. There's a little bit of a tendency for ADHD to folks to not have as much of an issue or to have a different reaction to the caffeine. So there's a little bit of a caveat there. You can listen to your body, but keep in mind that it can, even if you're not feeling the effects of the caffeine, it can suppress the sleep drive or the hunger for sleep. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So you want at least an hour of wind down time, especially for the work that therapists do. You know, we're holding some pretty intense emotions and stress, and so it can help written expression, could be journaling, planning for the next day. When somebody has a morning schedule, there might be more time to start first thing in the morning and plan out the day before work. But if you're working late, you may be needing to sleep in more, and you may not have that daytime planning in the morning. So you could do that at night. And if you're a night owl, you might thrive better with planning in the nighttime. You may have more mental clarity then. Okay, we want to keep the schedule really consistent. Otherwise, we're confusing our body clock and we're creating kind of a social jet lag. So if we think about jet lag when you're traveling across time zones, you're feeling really like you're at your home time physically. Your body clock is still based in whatever time zone you're from, and it takes a while to adjust. When we have a big shift or high variability in the sleep schedule, then it makes it really hard for the body clock to keep up with that. So we want to keep it consistent. Maybe you have 1 or 2 late days that you're working, but you might want to stay up, like pick a time that you can stay up to consistently and give yourself enough time to sleep in the morning. We also want a comfortable, cool, dark, quiet bedroom. So this almost goes without saying, but I do think it's important to keep an eye out for that. Sometimes we expect our bodies to just conk out right away, even if maybe there's less lights on or TV on. And not to say that you can't have TV, but I think we can get away with a lot more when we're younger than we can over time. So check this out, see what might be going on in the bedroom. All right, and then the last one is timing your meals. So if you're eating, let's say you're finishing work, finishing that last session, you're starving, so you cram in a meal, and then you try to go to bed right away. That has a pretty good chance of leading to reflux or not even physical symptoms, but just an increase in energy. So when you're eating, it gives us energy. So you might have a harder time getting to sleep because you have the energy from the food you've eaten. So if you can, time it so you eat your meal or your last snack or whatever you're eating, not right before bed. Give it a couple hours to kind of digest. Okay. So next we're going to talk about what essentially what causes sleep. So you can understand more about how to adjust this to fit your late work schedule. So we have the two process model. So basically there's two processes that really strongly influence sleep. There's more than two, but these are the two primary ones. So our sleep drive, I think about this like our sleep hunger. When we're awake, we slowly build up a hunger or drive for sleep, just like when it's been longer and longer since you've eaten, you're getting hungrier and hungrier. And then hopefully, when you eat, you're not as hungry anymore if you have a good meal. Similarly, if you get a good night's sleep, that discharges your sleep drive. It resets it. So that's something to keep in mind. And as the sleep drive increases, so does our subjective feelings of sleepiness. So the longer it's been since we've been awake, the sleepier we might feel. But just like hunger, these sleepy feelings can be masked by stress, caffeine, lots of things, including the circadian rhythm, which is the second point here. So there's more than one circadian rhythm, but we're talking about the sleep wake cycle. So humans are meant to be awake during the day. Most people. Some people are have day night reversal and they are absolute super night owls. Nothing wrong with that. It tends to be stigmatized in our society. Things or phrases like the early bird gets the worm, hustle culture in particular really glorifies the morning schedule, but we need night owls. If we were all morning people, or if we were all had that middle of the road schedule, we would have been more vulnerable to predators. The night owls really protected us by staying up late and keeping an eye on things. And so it's just part of the beautiful diversity of humanity. So if you're a night owl, that's wonderful. That's great. Lean into it. Enjoy it. Enjoy your energy in the evening. So, um, if you've ever had a really good day, let's say you didn't sleep very much that night before, but you have a really good day anyway. You have energy. You're feeling good. Maybe even you haven't even had that much caffeine. That might be thanks to your circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm might be saying, it's morning, it's daytime. We're feeling this. We're feeling alert and awake. So this is the two process model, and we want both of them to be working together. So here we have a graph where the arrows pointing down are sleep load. The more they point down, the more hunger for sleep or the more sleep load we have, and then the shorter they get, it's sort of being adjusted or reducing as we're sleeping. Then the circadian rhythm alerting signal. So it starts small in the beginning, it's pushing up more and more throughout the day. And this little wavy line here shows that for circadian rhythm, it's not like we slowly get sleepier and sleepier throughout the day. There's a little afternoon dip. If you don't have a morning schedule or an evening person type schedule, if you're more middle of the road, you'll have a little bit of energy in the morning, a dip in the afternoon, a little energy at bedtime, and then it goes down. So it's a little more complicated than these arrows show for circadian rhythm. But essentially, the idea here is that we want both of these to be working together. We want your hunger for sleep to be high at the same time that your body clock is saying time for bed. So if you have a night schedule, a late night schedule, especially if it's once in a while, it's not consistent. Your circadian rhythm is going to be really confused. Your sleep drive might be really high, but your circadian rhythm might be out of whack. So we want these two to be working together. So ideally, you're not sleeping a whole bunch one night and then shifting it. We want to keep them pretty consistent. And anything as far as addressing this, if they're out of alignment, would be beyond the scope of this mini presentation. So I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. I would love to talk through that, and there's so much more we can do here. We can use things like bright light therapy, melatonin. I could say a lot about melatonin, but that's out of the scope of this presentation. So here we have a graph of alignment versus misalignment. So when it's aligned, you're sleeping when the sun is down, and then during the day you're having leisure time or working in the morning, and then sleeping again at night. But when it's misaligned, the sun is up, and you can see it's kind of gray, but it's not as dark. The body is getting messages from the circadian rhythm that it's daytime, but the light isn't up anymore and we're sleeping. So that can create some confusion for the body. And they also have a symbol here of the light bulb because the light bulb is relatively new in human history. It might sound strange because it's not new to us. Most people have had the light bulbs all throughout their life, but we haven't had it as humans for very long. And so it can throw off the circadian rhythm and create some misalignment. This graph is from a study on how that impacts blood pressure. So it's talking about that here. But again, that's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. So this concludes the mini presentation. We've got some solid ideas here of what can help, and then a little bit of touching on what might be misaligned or what might be going on, and kind of some questions for you to ponder about your schedule and give you some information that my hope is can give you some insights. So in the live presentation, we had some wonderful discussions and some really excellent questions. But of course, that's not the case here. So please do feel free to reach out. You can email me. If you're not already on my website, you can visit that at bodymindalliancecc.com. And I offer a free consultation for clients, and I'm happy to receive any referrals. I do treat insomnia and other sleep disorders, help exhausted adults sleep well and break the cycle of sleeplessness using a research-backed approach. So if you could use any support with that, or if you have any clients who could use support, feel free to have them reach out. If it's something I can't help with, or if it's not a good fit, I'm not afraid to refer out. So just wanted to note that. And it's been a joy chatting. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I'd love to hear from you. Take care.